and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we are continuing our discussion of Alan Chazaro's poetry collection, Piñata Theory. This episode will be focusing on the second half of the collection, including the sections Break and Gather.
Nice. Well done.
Hi, guys.
Only took one take.
Oh my god.
All right, so today we're looking at Break and Gather, the second and third sections of the collection.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few poems in these two sections, 25.
I counted 25.
Mm-hmm.
You said, Vanessa. So obviously we're not going to get to talk about all of them. We have a few favorites.
As much as we'd love to
I know.
and
Yeah.
could.
So good.
Yeah.
So great. I know you wanted to, Richie, talk about
I'll put it on me.
the pronunciation mishap we had.
Well, I mean, first of all, I do want to thank Alan for tuning in and listening to the episode. Really appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you. And yeah, secondly, while I was re-listening to the episode, you know, I know we had a couple things when we talked about name pronunciations, and in the end, we ended up coming up to Jalapa. And for some reason, both of us were just like, Salapa? Jalapa? And it's just so funny. Like sometimes, you know, we just like have like a brain like stop. Like it's like, duh. I mean, we know this, right? It's Mexico, Oaxaca, like Jimena, like just the whole like. So
Yes.
when I was re-listening to it, I was like, oh my God, what the heck? So it just happens, you know? So just want to address like that whole thing. And it comes up here, right? But, you know, for me, and I talk about it a lot, but, you know, just this whole like pocho-ness of like, I'm still like self-aware of like the way I'll pronounce certain things. And so, you know, it's extra magnified in my mind, especially like upon re-listening to it. So
Yeah.
anyway, I just wanted to draw that from the previous episode. But again, thank you, Alan, for listening.
Yes. We feel very honored.
Yeah, anytime we get to listen to it, right? So we have two sections here. And I know, even though we would love to talk about all of them, let's see, who has the first one?
I don't know if we mentioned I know an inventory of cultural fragments was one of the ones that stood out to me just because of imagery.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of imagery in this whole collection, but
Yeah.
that one specifically, I really like it. I like that it is, you know, just fragments of these memories that the speaker had. Frijoles con tortillas y queso, poetry in Spanish with broken English translations, crickets inside my mouth, flowers that wouldn't survive the north. I mean, it beautifully captures a lot of the duality, you know, that kind of comes up throughout the collection. So I really like that. And pre-show, Vanessa, you were saying how it reminded you of Mexican Heaven. So I also wrote that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great writing exercise too, by the way. I think is just talking about imagery and then just maybe making a list of these things. Like, and so this is a great example of that. But you also mentioned pre-show. I always reference pre-show. Right? That's when the real conversations happen.
Oh my gosh.
When no one's listening. That again, Patreon tier. Be like the special gold tier subscribers will show before the show. But no, getting back to this, obviously, I distract myself too easily. Anyway, yeah, you mentioned the Mexican Heaven. And again, I think part of it is just, it's really fun to just read out loud, to say the words and feel the way, I don't know what you would call it, right? You study speech pathology, like just the movements of the mouth, right? Like the way the tongue interacts, you know, with your mouth and lips and facial muscles. And there's something great about it. But I know in pre-show, you talked about another podcast he was on, and you talked a little bit about the background of that. And I think that was pretty interesting stuff. I don't know if you want to mention that for our listeners.
I want to say that it was this poem that he was referencing. And he wasn't. It's interesting because he's talking about these images and these memories from Mexico, but he wasn't in Mexico when he was remembering all of this. So he was like in Cuba or somewhere. And I think that that's important to acknowledge because I feel like a lot of writers, I know Sandra Cisneros, for example, wrote House on Mango Street like somewhere else, like,
Mhm.
you know, and she's referencing home and childhood and everything. So I don't know why that always happens, that we feel the need to talk about home or we remember home or we miss it or it's just nostalgic or for whatever reason when we're away, you know? And so anyway, I'm pretty sure it was this one that he was referencing there. And I also want to, I guess, mention the fragments because, I mean, in poetry, todo se vale, right? Like we do whatever we want,
Right.
which is great. But I never really thought to, me personally, if I'm writing or thinking about a poem, it always comes to me in fragments too. And I never thought that the fragment itself could just be a poem. Like I always want to make it make more of it.
Like have like a narrative element to it.
Yeah. And this really inspired me to just jot down the fragments and leave them, you know, leave them be.
That's great.
Yeah.
That was my same thought too. Is like, damn, I don't do enough of this. It's almost like just an archive of these experiences, right? These again, they're called cultural fragments, but just again the imagery too of taste, of sound, of shape, of touch. You know, the senses, right? All the sensory language involved in the images, and love the Mescal Inside Jazz Clubs. That one spoke to me so beautifully, and did a great job with that on the canvas.
Did you have anything on this one, Vanessa?
I feel like you guys covered everything I want. Yeah, I mean, no, yeah, you guys. I feel like you guys covered everything on this one that I wanted to say.
Yeah,
but I really love this one.
Yeah,
it is a good. It could be a good exercise, right? Not just for us, but like our students and stuff.
I write that down. And I know that one of the things that we were doing lately before you joined us was we were also thinking a lot about pedagogy and like how to teach some of the books that we're looking at. So it's always kind of cool to kind of go back there and think about these things. I also like to maybe go back a couple pieces. Like, I mean, just maybe even to be brief. I really loved in Glitch, just kind of like the spirit of it. Just kind of like that one speaks to my soul as much too. Just like the Mescal Jazz Clubs, kind of. There's just a lot of lines that I have lived, and I think that's one of the great things about writing is when you experience that unity, that togetherness is like, oh man, this just speaks to me. I definitely know it. So there's some lines that like call me, right? And sometimes the hills are coyotes burning in their sleep, and tonight we need this moon between us, but who knows where this smoke will lead. And try listening to the deep whistle of sequoia and know these Nikes make me feel royal and Christmas, and it goes on. And I like this idea of patterns will form wherever you let them, because what is a formula if not this? And we will breathe. It goes on. It's great writing and imagery. That one's really, if we have heartstrings, this is a well-struck chord for me. Then again, going back to the next poem, Google Searching Mexico, I also love, I guess, the juxtaposition. You think of like writing exercises. I like this idea of taking common phrase, Google Searching Mexico, right? That's the kind of like the prompt, right? And if you do international travel, like you get these warnings, right? And that's what he's kind of using as the frame. But I like how he's creating this juxtaposition of taking this line and then what poetry should do is kind of breaks through the surface and take a deeper, more intimate dive into a lived experience. And I just love how you have this setup, this framework, and ultimately just the way it ends. I think him saying, "Do not tell me this is not home." It's a great ending. And of course,
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful, because again, I like to thread the pieces. So then that leads into what we opened up with, right? Inventory of cultural fragments. And with it, home. Do not tell me this is home in your heart. When you're away, that's the kind of thing you carry with you. And so to me, like a poem, like Inventory of Cultural Fragments, just makes so much sense when you're carrying it like that with you.
Yeah.
Even in your subconscious, in your dreams. So anyway.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I like that poem too, Google searching Mexico. Yeah, just form and the anecdotes that he's throwing in there, and I think you really captured that beautifully, Richie.
Yeah.
Oh, I had the next one. I know you had it too as well, right? Right.
The Lucha Libre, yes.
2.5.
2.5 parts.
That's cool.
Do you want to start?
No, go ahead. I'm trying not to talk too much as well. Like I just did a whole like rant. So
no, there's no such thing as talking too much. It's a podcast.
That's what we do.
Yes,
We
but
do
I'd like to share the mic equally.
So Lucha Libre in 2.5 parts. I like this one because of, I don't know, like everything that comes with the image of Lucha Libre, and we grew up on that stuff. Like it already has so much context that doesn't even need explanation, I like that it's broken up into La Lucha, El Libre, La Máscara. And each section's kind of like, I don't know, like in La Lucha, he's talking about what it would have been like to grow up in Mexico as opposed to growing up, in the Bay Area. And we think of lucha, the struggle or fight, how would that have compared, or how would that have changed who he is? I think that's a really, I don't know, an interesting kind of like hypothetical exercise too, right? Like what things could have been for him.
Different backgrounds, and I love that. Yeah. His Mexican me, right?
Yeah.
And again, if you think the page structuring, right, it's I think the staging, it's not the staging, right? The way it's put on the page is pretty great too. La lucha, right? That inner struggle. Lucha, and the libre, right? The freedom. Man, again, these lines are just so good. I mean, you guys heard me right now when I was reviewing the piece. Like, there's just some lines that make me audibly react to it. That's a great thing, like damn, that's good. Yeah. And then of course it's in Lucha Libre, it's 2 words, so you would think it'd be in 2 parts. And he does this thing where he'll add to it. He does this with another poem too, right? The whole A side, B side one. The creation of a C side, which I think is great because there's this thing here of working past dualities. And so I like how he adds in Lucha Libre, you have the máscara, right? That's such a huge cultural component of Lucha Libre, right? It's
yes.
And if you don't understand, because like people know wrestling, for example, right? But Lucha Libre, like the máscara, and then of course mask is image, right? Of who you are and how you're represented is such. I mean, that's such a heavy image too. So it's included in there. I freaking so great. And then just this, I think this image of him talking about, I mean, there's something very almost maybe Zen of talking about nothingness and anythingness. He mentions it in the end of the El Libre section. I would cheer for nothing and I would cheer for anything. Talking about, I mean, we were already talking about watching USA versus Mexico, for example, and kind of being, I would cheer for nothing and cheer for anything. Like I love the way that's reframed, and then taking that later to talk about his identity, right? This birth certificate that his mother shows him, right? This almost contradiction or paradox. The weightlessness feel is something that shouldn't exist. I hold it like it's nothing. Damn. Like nothing I've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's freaking beautiful. There's just a pace right now that this whole collection's coming through, and it's hitting a stride of like, damn, go,
damn, Alan,
go,
fire.
Yeah,
yeah. I like that. I mean, I like the Libre section when he's talking about his privilege and acknowledging that, and I think that comes up too in previous poems, but not as, overtly as it is coming here. And yeah, like that whole La Máscara part, like the máscara being like the uniform. It's like a lot of people you're trying to explain lucha libre like, oh, like wrestling. No, it's not. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's its whole other own thing. Lucha libre is different in that way. But yeah, I really I love that last line too. I hold it like nothing I've ever known.
Oof.
I know.
Right.
There's those, X's again in this poem. I'm wondering what you all thought of, because in the first section we figured, okay, some of those breaks are the actual breaking of the piñata, or they could signify that or symbolize that. In this one, what do you all think they? I mean, it's in the break before each section, but
I guess like the division between his identities, in a sense. Like the different aspects of himself.
So yeah, it does parallel that earlier we talked about. That's the poem Piñata Theory, right? The titular poem.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that's part of theory, right? Is just this idea of being fragmented and broken, and the way he talks about thinking about that process and reconciling. And so Lucha Libre also has that kind of inherent like art and violence and yeah, especially art to it. And so I see those X's as breaks as also just related thematically, like a blow, like a hit. I mean, you think of Lucha Libre, it's like the back and forth, boom, 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 and it's break the natural break into sections. So it looks good too aesthetically, right? Matches there. And then fighting the urge to want to talk about every piece, right? But I know there's I don't know what you guys have next.
I think we're referencing a Pocho Boys mixtape because of those A side, B side, C side. And I think he in that other podcast episode with him, he was talking about reclaiming the term Pocho, which is really cool. Because, it's always seen as like negative, derogatory,
exactly, man.
An insult, right?
Yeah.
To be pocha or to be pocho. But he's claiming it as, well, I'm neither this nor that. It doesn't have to always be so black and white either or, right?
You're right.
Can be more of like, I am both of these things or all of these things. Yeah, I'm a pocho, so what? Right?
Yeah.
Pocho doesn't have to be, so negative.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I've definitely done on this show in past books, past collections. About it. Yeah. I loved it. Yeah. I mean, the whole A side, B side thing. And then, of course, again, you have that from music. And of course, it's a mixtape. That blends so well after talking about Emily's collection, right?
Yeah.
But I just love the way he ends it, right? That point that he says there. Don't forget, there are more than two sides to every story, just like there are more than two stories inside every mouth. And that just, again, reiterates what you were just talking about. There's more to it. There's where we come from, who we are, and what makes us and who we are, and are still becoming.
I also like the line, but who cares about simple geometry when nothing shapes up?
It's a good line.
Yeah.
There's a lot of punny little lines here and there that I think that work really, really well. And again, like I said, just when it speaks to me, it's those kind of things too, right? Some really like clever wordplay here and there. I feel like, thinking about when on B side, he's talking about like, taxes, how do taxes work, in this case. And back in the States, I know they'll ask for more than my mother's peace. And I think here again, you think of peace being can be read both ways. As yes, it's read as peace as like settled, peaceful, but also peace as part of something that's broken off for like her peace, PIECE.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then taxes, I think that's maybe me reading more into it. I don't know. But then again, I think that's what the art of poetry, right? You interpret.
Yes.
So,
Especially if you hear this instead of reading it,
mhm.
how you interpret it will be, different. So
You just go through and dig, just like a DJ would go through crates, right? You dig through and pull stuff out, and like, oh, this works. Let's work with that right now. He even mentions that right on the seaside, right at the beginning. I dig through remixed crates of myself, wax pressed into the grooves of forever. Like, damn, yes, go, keep spinning. Yeah, long distance running. I had also mentioned pre-show, in the sense that we've been talking about language, right? First of all, I really love that line about cliche. No. Cliches are a rerun of something realer. The question. It's a cool way of putting it. But we were talking about autocorrect and just like similarity of words, like root words, and like how they're used, like, and also typos, the way we misuse them sometimes. So you kind of ask these questions, right? Since beating you questionable instead of quesadillas, or deported instead of deportes. Horrifying and horrible, right? Thinking about the similarities and questioning the language to eventually come to like the word illegal, right? That's in discourse on immigration, that is a very heavy loaded word, so much so that so many of us are asking journalists to rethink the use of that word, right? Because and of course you have campaigns like no human being is illegal, right? But of course, so here you also see the presence, and I think you see it in a bunch of several other poems later on too. I think that's interesting is the presence of cops, authorities. There's always kind of a tension there, and it's also their presence in certain neighborhoods, right? Like the hood, the ghetto, like the neighbor, like where people are living. There's a certain tension there in their presence, and I don't know if you guys picked up on that as well. Like whenever cops are present, there's a little bit of a anxiety or tension involved, and I think that's pretty relevant with a lot of the climate that we've had forever. I said a lot. This is why I limit. I'm like
no, that's good. I mean,
just vomit it, see what sticks.
I like this one, but I didn't have like notes on it. I just really like the what you're saying about auto correct and you were mentioning how you're also working on a poem similar to that.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting thing, and the way the meanings change. Pre-show, we were talking about. You had mentioned that it's one of my favorites is when people misspell definitely as defiantly. And God, some of the accidental meanings that come out are so good. So there's something to work with there. Anyway,
yes,
it's really hard to craft a poem sometimes when you have that goal and it's like I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, this reminded me in some instances, but gentrification makes its way right in some of these poems. Like,
yeah.
Think of California's Turning Neon, kind of brings it up. It starts to become really present. Oh, yeah. The hunger one.
Yeah.
I was just mentioning that, right? About the police presence, for example. I think that's a pretty interesting way he says it there, where a flickering disappearance of house lights when suddenly police arrive. That was a pretty interesting way of talking about this instance, right, of a accident, car accident, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good ones. Hunger is coming up a lot. Reminds me of what is it? We're always hungry. They are always. Jeez.
Some are always hungry.
Some are always hungry.
Yes.
Right? Talk about that hunger. Speed running this. What are you?
I don't know.
Wow. I thought, okay. I know. Well, you had burning, etc., right?
Yeah,
did you?
I like this one. Burning, etc. It's on page 64.
Gotcha.
I just felt like there was a lot of really strong line. This is one of the longer pieces in the collection. But there's like a lot of lines that I liked. So on page 67, he wrote, well, the speaker says, I don't know why I stay inside myself so often and away during holidays. I don't know, that was something that I related to, I think. I was like, I like that. And then we came from Bone Thugs and Selena, a mix of vibrations in our bone dust. And I just like that like contradiction of the artists.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And then I also like there's like two more spots that I really liked. I need to know what it means to be small and sober, to hold heaviness and hustle it throughout my bones. These mountains cannot be overlooked. And then I also really liked I rarely talk loud. I put these rocks in my blood and pretend I am not fluent and burning tongues. I don't I like this one, I think, because it's tackling a bunch of different things, but all dealing with like the speaker's identity.
Making sense of it all.
Like all of the different contradictions within themselves.
Yeah. To me, this is like a carried spirit of the same in Glitch, that poem earlier on in this section. In particular, I did highlight that last part you read as well. The ending is pretty strong in particular. And I don't know, just, there's a strong sense of trying to make sense of it all. Just finding your place in the universe, right? And to kind of like the build up, because I do like that, which you read, but just before it, talking about the heaviness and hustle throughout bones. These mountains cannot be overlooked. I cannot juggle planets, cannot press rewind and shove it all back. Where does this weight on my bone ribs grow from? Just thinking about, and he used this phrase a couple times. There's no talk about. I'm not talking politics. There's no politics, because I think that address is like something that I see it a lot, where people are like, I don't like to talk about politics, and it's just like, politics is us. It's every day. It's like the personal is political, right? Political is personal. I know Jorge mentions that a lot in previous episodes. So I think it's an interesting little thing he throws in there. He uses it a couple times in this collection. But anyway, I agree. Love of this kind of my place in the universe kind of.
Yeah.
from other places, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme for sure in this section, break section. Like breaking away from what's expected of him, what he expects of himself, how he identifies, all of those things. Yeah, I like that. There's no talk of politics. It does not upset me too. But I think to comment on what you're saying, Richie, like, I feel like when people say I don't like to talk about politics, it's because of their privilege, right?
Because it doesn't affect them.
They have that choice to not have to discuss politics, whereas the rest of us have to. Like, it's all around us. It's part of our way of life. I don't know. But yeah, I like this one too. I like that it is kind of fragmented too in that sense, like you were mentioning, Vanessa. Why do you think it's titled Burning, etc.?
Because you're taking away like the etc. from yourself. So it's not like, oh, I'm this, and this, etc. It's like, I'm all of these things. Right? I don't know. That's what I take it as.
Okay.
We can ask Alan.
Yeah. We will. Hopefully we'll have a chance. I think we're trying to work something out. So Alan will see when our stars align. our cosmology. I know you use that in another poem. Gentrification. That's all I read when I see gentrification.
Gentrification, yeah. A lot of breaks in that one. That was on gentrification.
Yeah, there are a lot of breaks. Well, the whole burning title kind of, I was going to refer to Notes on Gentrification because, the second to last stanza, little line there. In that one. Last night, the city danced with fire in her spine. Afterwards, smoke. That kind of reminds me of the previous one, right? Like burning is like this act. This, I guess you would call it like a gerund, right? Burning, and etc. being like the everything, the aftermath, and then it's interesting.
I think visually it's appealing. Just trying to figure out, the purpose for those X's. Especially, you don't really see it after like a couplet, right? Like 2 lines and then a break that soon into the poem. And then it's like after every very short stanza, you have them. So I don't know.
It does have that almost rhetorical implication of, again, violence, of like a piñata being hit now, since we started with Piñata Theory. And then the other instance, Lucha Libre, right? The fighting. And then, of course, now here in gentrification. The things being bring up. And again, now there's that suddenness, that shortness to each section that feels like there's less and less around.
Yeah.
Good. I think this one's also the last one that has the breaks in it like that.
In the section or in the whole collection?
In the whole collection. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense in this poem now, seeing it that way. I mean, because gentrification isn't a peaceful, like, can we come in and take over your neighborhood? Kind of, we're just coming in and taking over and going to make of it whatever we want. Kind of approach, taking, destroying.
Yeah.
So.
Colonizers.
Point.
Patient comes up, and I like how that's like the last poem of this section. We have break, and I mean, being deported is like that's a whole emotional explosion, an implosion, explosion at the same time. It's just everything falls apart. So it breaks. That you think of families that are separated because of this, and here you kind of. I mean, we talked a lot about masculinity in the previous episode and in the first section, and he ends here with men crying, sitting in a circle crying. So just kind of thinking about what that does. We know, especially with a lot of work that we do, or thinking about in immigration, the real effect it has on families and separation and all that. And then end of section.
End of the break.
Yeah. What is gather? What do you guys take of that? What does it mean to gather? We did kind of talk about this, and you asked before we started recording, and I was like, "Wait, stop! Leave it for the podcast. This is good stuff."
Yeah.
Let's see if we can capture some of that magic again.
Yeah. Vanessa started to mention like what she thought of these sections being called, break and gather, and the poems within these sections. And again, coming back to the piñata metaphor, gathering, not even metaphor, but like the act of breaking the piñata and gathering what's inside. How, I can't remember if that was a question, like how do we feel gather is being represented?
Yeah. I mean, something similar to that.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
And the way that I described it and the way that I understood it is, so you kind of mentioned earlier about how with a piñata, you like go for the good stuff, like the candy and like the prizes. So in the previous sections, we were kind of talking about the breaking apart of someone's identity and like who they are and questioning the negatives of who they are and all of the aspects of who they are. And here in Gather, it's a lot more of being together with family and the memories with family, the memories of home, and like taking all of the good stuff from these experiences that you have and making like seeing the good in them as well.
I like that.
Thank you.
Think of like, yeah, I mean, there, again, so we also have like the literal and figurative meanings of like a piñata and what happens there. And first episode, we spoke a lot on that imagery of, again, a piñata as something that's meant to be destroyed and it just has that, it's almost like it's destiny. And here, I mean, a lot of the sense we've been trying to make is that's not really, like, our identities are so unique in where we come from. And so this third section seems like it's that, right?
Yeah.
Is it finding it in family and thinking about those memories of being a kid and growing up in these different places. Yeah, absolutely. Just gather that sense of self. And also, like, again, to maybe go back into that whole aspect of violence of like being broken with being hit by a stick, that literal piñata thing, versus what life does to us. Oftentimes after trauma, we have to gather ourselves.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not that we have to, but I mean, that's just kind of what naturally happens in one way or another. So I don't know. What do you think, Marina?
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, like that's something that's coming up a lot in these last few poems. And the gathering, obviously, in that metaphor could literally mean one thing, but also like rebuilding or, reconstructing or putting things back together from the burning or from the wreckage or from the trauma or all of those things, right? So, yeah, I think it means a lot of things, all of those things that you all mentioned and more. Which is why
and the seaside.
I know, which is why it's so cool because, again, it's just like we mentioned last time, the metaphor that just keeps on giving.
I mean, even then, you think a piñata is made from like scraps.
Yeah.
So it's like that cycle again and again. Too.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. What you guys think of that first poem? I really liked the while visiting Mexico, I binge watched the first season of Stranger Things on Netflix. And yes, I had to read the whole title. What'd you get?
He has great titles, I just gotta say.
Good titles.
Yeah. I liked the comparison of the kids in Stranger Things to migrants. So I bet the group of kids don't laugh.
Sorry, I like your thinking noise. No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So it says, I bet the group of kids in this show could have snuck inside anywhere. Their little Indiana, hands never getting caught. I wonder what would happen if they crossed a desert's body.
Yeah, I like that line.
Yeah.
Too. I wonder if I have ever crossed a desert's body. Going back to privilege, I think. Maybe.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, it translates to the, in Stranger Things, you have like this sci-fi, like you have the upside down, right?
Yeah.
This element, and then you have reality, right? The reality of having to cross dangerous terrain of the border of the desert, right, from one place. So I think that's that juxtaposition. And this poem has some lines that just made me audibly say like "damn" or just react. And you guys heard me. What you're doing. I mean, I really love the setup, right? Because you have the great title. Those are and fun, and they kind of bleed into the poem, right? Like just to start. And I love how he says, "And I consider multidimensional travel as we make jokes in English and then laugh in Spanish." You have that break there that works really well. And then I also love the line thinking about monsters, right? Monsters do not emerge from an unknown parallax, but my ellipses sometimes require translation. Like those are pretty cool lines in their own right, but also just again thematically setting up his contrast here. What he's going to do here. Good start to that section. Be remixed again, right? He talks about that again at the end of the poem. Remixed into multiplicity. And then again the playfulness of language that I was mentioning and we've talked about. My deepest breath before another episode airs. And of course air. Television, but also just breath, air. Like I'm like, damn, yes, cool. I'm for it.
I like the line when I was their age, I ran outside Abuela's and I don't understand what it means to be a stranger where the sewage is broken.
It kind of also reminds me of the last poem, that part, right? You read. We'll get there. I think. I hope.
We're almost there.
Self-portrait was you had leaving footprints on waterfalls, right, Vanessa?
Yes, I did. So there's just a couple of strong lines that I wanted to talk about. So towards the middle of the poem, how borders are thresholds of the imagination. And that kind of got me thinking about like not only like the border of countries, but also like the imaginary borders we have of ourselves, like in dealing with our own identities and how we, I guess in a sense, depending on who we're around, kind of change. And like there's those borders around our personalities. So I really liked that line. And then I also liked, towards the end, how the word me lives in America and in Mexico. I put a little heart there because I was like, me too.
Oh, I put a star.
I just underlined it.
But yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, those are my lines from that
one. Did you have anything in this?
No, I think it just goes back to like that last line, how I'm a forest that grows during wildfires. Like there's that imagery again. And
also just the recycling, like the birth, rebirth, like constantly. Yeah. Also like the imagery of the sweetbread there. Tied to memory. Like I wonder what is real that isn't shared with others, how we share memories like sweetbread and how sweetbread crumbles when shared. Like, yeah, all right. Like it's a nice way of talking about like memory. There's a sweet thing, this concept of sharing sweetbread, like, oh man, yes. And then but also the crumbling of it and then the way memories work and the way our memory we talk a lot about the fragility of that and how we tend to it's imperfect. But God, what a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about shadow boxing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important because it's the only poem in Spanish in the whole collection. And I know a lot of these poems actually have very specific forms. And this one, has those breaks in between the lines. What are those called?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the line breaks. Yeah, I feel like I was just thinking that too. Like, I feel like we haven't drawn as much attention because he has some really great line breaks throughout the collection. And I was like, I made notes of like, this is a great line break. I mean, it would be the term just flew out of my head. Enjambment.
Oh yes.
I really like the line, un pintor me dijo que nunca pintaba con sus manos. I like that. And el otro país me enseñó 2 por 2 suma 5. Pregúntame si es posible tener 2 de todo. Las flores caminan solas y mis manos se quedan sin nada. I don't know. It's really beautifully, I don't know. Anything in Spanish, I'm like, it's so beautiful. It's romantic.
I agree.
But it's like shadow boxing, and I'm reading this and I'm thinking, well, where's the shadow boxing? Like, what role does that play in these images? And and something I have to think a little bit more about, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, same here.
But I like that. And thinking about shadow boxing, the image of that and all of the other more masculine type of images in the collection.
We've had boxing show up. I mean, a lot of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although this one doesn't have the breaks, right?
Doesn't.
The same way.
So it's not.
It's shadow boxing. So maybe it's
Yeah.
more of like a mental, a mental exercise more than a physical one.
Mhm.
Something to ponder on.
I know. I know. This
Good.
one's good in that sense because I'm like, okay, what is it? What does this mean? How does it relate back to that?
That's why I love poetry, because then
Yeah.
it can stick with you, and then like today, you know, you reopened it and you saw things you hadn't seen previously, and that's oh, I love that too. So I know even again listening to this episode right now, I'll be like, however I'm listening, like driving, and be like, why didn't I talk about this? Or like, yeah, you know, it's good stuff. Ooh, you like the next one, huh, Vanessa?
I did like the next one.
Photo from an unborn child.
About Bart Simpson.
We did have that conversation. We're not familiar with the area, so we assumed it's obviously right context transportation, but
But what does it mean? I'm just kidding.
yeah, because the first thing I think of is Bart Simpson, you know. Like, but of course, we all know that it is
The Bay Area Rapid Transit.
There it
is.
There
There you
it is.
We had to ask Google.
we were testing ourselves, like what it could stand for. T was interesting because there's a lot of transportation, transport, train, trolley, teleportation, time travel. Like there's there's a lot of wow. Okay, let's all keep it in the T's. But yeah, transit. We missed that one. Anyway,
yeah.
So what do you like about this one?
I like that it's a collection of memories in a sense, but also of specific places, like a specific area. So in the second stanza, like to the end almost, your mother grew up here on 55th, around the corner from her cousin's tire shop and the bar your grandpa would take her to perform Mariah Carey karaoke as a kid to crowds of drunken men. The shop is now closed and the bar boarded up with graffitied wood, but the house remains. I think this is a really cool way of describing it because you can picture it, and that's exactly what's trying to be done here. So it's like a photo for your unborn child, but you're describing all of these things, and not only are you seeing them, you're also getting events that are happening in these places, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, a lot of places hold memory.
Yeah.
And I think that ties into this idea of sacred land. That's
Yes.
one of the big, and it makes such a brief appearance at the beginning of this piece, but that's a pretty heavy connection, I think. And he uses, I noticed he starts using a lot of things like cosmology and astronomy, and here he also does constellations,
Yes.
right? How they're formed from the darkness of our mouths, like our storytelling, our words, like, oh yes, you're hitting it right here. And just again, this theoretical piece, right, of sharing this. One day I'll take you here, or we'll show you where these memories, these places have memories attached to them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, you know, when we talk about gentrification, you level a place, and I mean, that's why so many people like don't want development on certain lands, because it has significance, has those meanings historically, culturally, through family.
Duranguito.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that line, those lines before what you read, Vanessa. The homes are historic and diverse as the people who breathe inside them.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Again, relating that there's people attached to. Now, earlier we were talking about like typos and autocorrect. There's also misreadings. That line you just read, I initially read it as the homies are historic, which I mean, he still kind of argues it is there. So I'm like,
The homes and the
which
homies.
also makes
the homes and the homies. Yeah.
The homes and their homies. Yeah, that still works.
I think so.
See, I just in feature edits, you can just Put them together. Just kidding.
And then karaoke, we were talking about that too.
True.
We did.
I would never do Mariah Carey.
I would love to see it now.
Karaoke. That would be hard.
Mariah
That would be-
karaoke.
I know, that's why I stumbled on it. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Mariah Carey karaoke.
And Drew Carey karaoke. Yeah, I mean, but also you do have again more of that gentrification showing up, right? Thinking about this exercise of bringing a child to these spots that are now boarded up and you know, graffitied over, and just
Yeah.
you see a lot of cities going through that.
Mm-hmm.
We're nearing the end though.
I know you like the last poem, Richie. You feel like it really tied
I do?
everything together. One Way Street and Jalapa.
There you go. Jalapa.
Not all those other.
See how it comes full circle
mispronunciations.
all over.
I thought you had said that earlier. No?
I mean, I alluded to it because
Okay.
I mean, again, you have him. I think it's interesting. He's kind of ending with the memory of again being a kid, and he talks about his grandma's driveway. That's one of the things there, right? And even thinking about passage of time, in a way, you know, this poem kind of condenses other things that show up previously in the collection.
Mhm.
I mean, you talked about privilege, and again, here we're talking about in this case of like his Americanness here, situated in Mexico. Talking about how the kids would laugh and chase each other in our Mickey Mouse T-shirts, right? You gotta represent Disney, you know, as like the corporate capitalist. I don't know, it's like the most what is it, the magical kingdom or most magical place in the world? But you know, it also has those attachments. And I just in terms of again imagery, just like this idea of our soft American fingers through a gap in the iron bars to wiggle with wonder. Just these little chubby American fingers reaching through iron, because it's like this almost like a mystical place the way it's situated in this description of the poem, right? Because they wouldn't leave it, and there's a little bit of that guarding part of it, and the wonder, right? Just reaching out beyond of what you know. And I think that's a great way to end it. You know, it's kind of like that in a movie, like you're reaching out towards something. And of course they're kids, right? Because obviously throughout this whole book we get goes back and goes back home and visits family and the land, and right, it becomes home in his heart. And so I just like the way that's ending with the image of kids reaching out past the iron gates. One Way Street in Jalapa. And scene.
Yeah, I like the nostalgic aspect in those days. He sat 3 times in this poem. That also kind of, I don't know, it feels, what's that, 2 poems after Photo for My Unborn Child, like when parents are telling their children something about how life used to be for them. It's always like, well, back in my day, you know, or in those days. So it kind of also feels like the same, it has the same vibe or tone in this poem, like to the audience, like reading, like he's talking about it fondly and remembering it with nostalgia.
Yes.
So, you know, at first, when I first read this and he was talking about the iron bars, it's like, that could be read in different ways too. But I really like Richie's interpretation because that gives it more of a lighthearted than what I initially
That's
thought.
kind of who I am too, though. So like, you know how the poem reads us too?
Yes. I also connected it back to the Stranger Things poem. How it says their little Indiana hands never getting caught. But here they're being shouted at for doing so. So that was interesting to me.
Also want to point out, of course, we have the acknowledgments. We usually do that. And again, you know, when someone writes a book, it's never kind of like on their own. Obviously, it's their work and their work, their passion, their art, their craft. But then you see like the community that builds itself around something like that. And I love the way he does it. There's a very like personal little touch to it. And, you know, I love the section he talks about to his wife who's seen him through his different piñata stages, and that's beautiful because we talked about the metaphor, and he adds one here of also my swing, right? You can also be the one with the swing. We haven't talked about that one a whole lot ourselves. But also he thanks Border Senses. So he was published in Border Senses.
I saw that too.
And he was in Latinx, and
That's so cool.
so pretty cool. Shout! I see a lot of familiar names too, of course. In that,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So acknowledge to everyone involved with that. So good collection. I had a lot of fun reading it.
Yeah, I like this one
too. I just ordered his first collection. This is not a Frank Ocean. Is that what it's called?
cover album. Yes.
Okay. So I'm excited to read that one.
Awesome.
Yeah, this was very cool. I really like this one. And I'm glad because he's relatively new-ish. So we like to expose like new writers and poets. I'm glad I got to read this and, be exposed to more contemporary poetry and stuff that I can relate to a lot. Prefer it.
Yeah, this collection was really inspiring. Makes me want to become a better writer.
So now we have to think of what we want to ask.
Yes. So hopefully
we
next
get a
episode
chance
we
to.
can do an interview. Yeah. So see you guys next time.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on this episode.
No, I was gonna beatbox while you did it.
I know.
Okay.
I mean, you could have. I was still going.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Go do your thing.
Okay. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, brought to you by Border Senses and Power at the Pass. This episode, we continued our discussion on Piñata Theory by Alan Chazaro. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylitep.